Okay, this is about these will be some preliminary results that I gained from a teaching and learning exercise I undertook for my human-computer interaction course. Um, the deputy principal will be happy to know that all of this is Caribbean grounded, 100%. So that should please everyone. Okay, so let's get straight to it. This is all about using audio stories in my human-computer interaction course. So let's start. Human-computer interaction. Well, as the name implies, that is basically the study of the interaction between humans and computers. Now, this will range from what you're familiar with, the user interfaces, the software, something like this, all the way up to the psychological aspects of that. So to give you an example of what I'm talking about, in Japan, they do research on how we react to robots. So one researcher has discovered that humans like robots to look more and more like us. Okay, that sounds obvious, but it actually reaches a point where when it becomes too much like us, human beings start to reject it. And this just goes to show that while we like robots to look something like us, there's a point at which we must still be able to tell what is the robot and what is the human. Okay? Another example which I find quite interesting is virtual possessions and the value that we place on it. By virtual possessions, let's see. One example is there was a documentary of a gentleman who he's now a millionaire making virtual, how do I put this? Virtual beds. I wouldn't say for what activity. But he's now a millionaire. He builds these things for an online site called Second Life. And imagine, so yes, for building virtual objects, and people pay 4,000 US for this bed, 4,000 US for this device, and they're all virtual. So it makes me wonder if I shouldn't have switched careers. Okay? So this just goes to show that, people are laughing, that there's a lot to study in this area. Now the actual course is by the same name. It's a level 3 course, 4 credits, offered semester 1. It's optional for students doing computer science and information technologies. It's an elective. What is most important about this course, I should say now, is the major software development project that takes place. It's about 2 months long. And students are required, based on what they learn in the course, to build a piece of software to solve a problem from start to finish. This is actually my favorite course because it gives me an opportunity to get students to be very creative, because based on the description I gave before, you can see that this will really give you an opportunity to do things, okay? The actual course is based on the principle that the user is central. The user is the most important part. Yes, I know when you're using software that may not seem true, but that is a fact. And this is becoming more and more important now with the rise of Apple and these companies who are competing for your attention in the mobile space, where usability is now the most important thing. So I think because of that, the numbers in the course is rising at a rapid rate. But nevertheless, that little smiley face in the middle is you and me. And that is basically saying that everything that the student learns must revolve around the user. So things like we learn about how we socially interact. You learn about the human physical characteristics. For example, the speed at which an image travels from the eye to the brain is important in this area in developing a user interface. Things like diversity, age, gender, all these things come into play. Even culture. So in some cultures, red is considered, it's telling you something is dangerous or alert. In others, it's telling you it's good luck. So red in some cultures, it's actually a good luck color, while in ours it tends to alleviate warnings, etc. But you get the idea from the diagram that everything is centered around the user. That major principle is what gives students the most grief. Asking them to understand the user central, and it's not just students. You'll find that in the software industry in general, a lot of people have problems grasping that simple fact. And this is one of the reasons why you get a lot of unusable software. Okay? So when you're using software and you're finding difficulty with it, don't blame yourself necessarily. It's not always us. Sometimes it's just badly designed software. And this is probably one of the reasons why Apple's iPhone has taken, not probably, it is one of the reasons why their iPhone has taken off, because they made the phones easy to use. So that is a concept that students struggle with, because when you say the user is central, when you're building software, you need to build it so that it focuses on what the user needs and what the user expects. And here comes the problem. How can I walk in someone's shoes? So in other words, if I decide to put on a dress. Does this mean that I know what it's like to be a woman? Well, clearly not. It means I wear a dress. Don't get ideas, okay? So, all right, so, but you get the idea. So for most programmers, the temptation is to use yourself, reflect everything off yourself in the development. So you will find, like take one example, one student project developed a game, and they made the assumption that, and the group for some reason was only males, but they decided that because they built this game and they were testing it, only males will like it and the females won't. But actually the results were the females preferred the game over the males. So it just goes to show that you can't make these sort of assumptions. So even though I'm giving them the theory from which to build the software and come to proper conclusions, there's still that temptation, especially when you're under pressure, to use yourself as that example. Okay? And as I said before, it's not just students, you find it in the industry as a whole. So I decided maybe, well, that's the best way, but what I decided to do was to have a two-step process here. As opposed to pushing them into the final project, just using the theory, et cetera, that we have developed, give them something beforehand that will enable them to experience and explore this whole idea of the user as central. So the task that I would have given them before that project does not really require them to focus too much on the theory. I just wanted them to focus on that one aspect, the user is central. Okay, you with me so far? And so I was hoping that when they focused on all that, they will gain some insight and some understanding on the concept before moving into the major project, because a lot of the errors that I'm talking about, they would have made in that project. Okay, so for example, another example of an error they made was one group decided to build a game for whom they called the aged, and they decided aged was 60 years and up. No comment on that. But they decided that because you're 60 years and up, you by default must have memory problems, and so they built a game that used memory. And I asked them, where did you get that idea from? But they reflected on themselves, because remember at 21, everyone else is old. Okay, so that was the sort of idea. So I wanted them to get away from that. So what I asked them to do is I was going to give them a design exercise to focus on a user group with special needs. Okay? So this leads now to the title of everything. The group that I asked them to look at were blind users. Now, blind users are very interesting. And when I say blind, I mean totally blind, not legally blind, partially visually impaired or anything. We were focusing on those who are totally blind. And there are several good reasons to do this. One of the things is I want to increase their awareness of the needs of that group and other groups in similar predicaments when developing software. Another good reason for picking that group was when you think about software developed for that group, what tends to happen is that we build software for the sighted users and then try to force it onto the blind users. And this is, of course, leads to a lot of errors and a lot of problems for blind users. Well, let me give another example. Another example is building websites. The tendency is to build a website for the sighted user, strip out all the visual graphics, and just drop it there for the blind user. And actually, the interesting thing is you can do that and still meet international standards for websites for blind users and still end up with a website that's no use to them. Because no real thought was taken into account on what their needs are, the fact that they can't see anything on the screen. And so blind users, even I've talked to some in Barbados, always resort back to the one for sighted users, and they just skip over the images until they get what they want. So that says a lot about the state of software for those users. But one thing I told the students in developing this software, they must not, under any circumstances, test their software on the blind community in Barbados. And one of the reasons for that is when speaking to their leaders, they said to me that we are always used as test subjects, lab rats. Especially from, I'm sorry to say this campus, where a lot of students go down there to get surveys done and whatnot, produce the results, and then just disappear. And they never hear anything again. And they were adamant they weren't going through that again. And I didn't think it's wise as well to send inexperienced students into a vulnerable group like that, to treat them in that manner. So I told them they're just going to have to find a way to test it without them. Some actually resorted to blindfolding themselves. But for this exercise, that's good enough. Okay? So the objective, the activity was they were required to create interactive audio story. The story for blind users, and the story had to be educational in nature. Okay? Now, when we say interactive audio stories, we're talking about stories which can have multiple endings. And the endings and the path through the story depend on what the user does during the story itself. So I based this on the old type, the ones based in the book when I was younger, where you read up to a section in the book and it says, for the main character, pick one of these 5 options or 4 options, and then it will jump you to another page. Anyone ever saw those books? Jeez, am I that? Oh, goodness gracious. All right, so you just jump back and forth until you come to the last section on there. But now you see that in games, where before games used to guide you one step after the other, and at the end you get a score. Games now are so sophisticated that whatever path you take would lead you, so you can actually go through the game and get to the goal in a completely different manner than that. There's actually a game out called Skyrim, which I doubt many of us would be particularly interested in, but the thing that I was interested in that is that they claim there are infinite number of ways to solve the game. I'm sure it's not an infinite, but you get the idea. So this game flows based on how you interact with the game. So in this case with the audio story, here you have this story being repeated to you, and then at some point you have to make a choice, or you have to commit an activity, and then that activity will determine where you go in the game, okay? Well, in the story, I should say. So the process of developing it, well, a student will go through this process this way. First of all, they will actually have to create the story, which is saying the obvious. But the thing about it is it's not just a linear story from start to end. It has a lot of subplots and things that can go in that can lead to another direction or a different end. They also had to ensure that this particular story had at least three different endings. That was a requirement. And the other requirement is that if a user just rushed through from start to finish without thinking through it, it must end in under 10 minutes. Okay? So that was the requirement. So they would build this story, et cetera, et cetera. And then they had to create, remember this is all sound, so they had to create the audio files that go after creating the text of the story, convert that to audio. But then they also had to do a little programming, the part that says script there, which would guide the part that will look at your actions and then determine where you're going next. Okay? I'm trying to say this in non-programming speak. Okay? So the scripting part is the part that controls the activity and the direction you take, and the audio files, etc., will be the actual stuff that you hear. The actual software itself, this part in the nice little red box there, were built by me for part of my research. And this, what the students would do is after building the actual application, or the actual story, I should say, they would use this application to run it and see if they were successful or if what they did made any sense. Okay? The actual interaction with this system is strictly keyboard and speakers. Okay? And one of the reasons that I restricted it that way, so no mouse, no graphics, because remember, a blind user is not going to use these things. If you look at a blind user's computer, the first thing they will have done is put the mouse in the back. The computer mouse is only kept for someone who has to help them with the computer. So everything is usually keyboard or braille, keyboard, and speaker. Okay? So I restricted them in that way because I wanted them to get a feel of what it's like, as close as we can as sighted users. Okay? Now, the actual creation of the audio stories is a lot more complex than for us as computer science scientists and students, and computer science students, because remember, we're not actors. We have I know only one student in my course actually has prior acting experience, but the rest of us don't. But yet, they're trying to convey a story using voice only. Okay? So they have to convey the context using only voice. There are no pictures and etc. So this now pulls them out of their comfort zone because now they can't fall back on what they're used to falling back on. And then the other difficulty that they would have had to encounter is getting the sounds, because you have different sounds and trying to merge it into one smooth sound with continuity, with no breaking. You want to have a sound in the foreground and one in the background and all this stuff. And since we don't have a lot of fancy audio mixing software, etc., they found some ways to do it. I left it up to them to decide how to do that on their own. In spite of the grumblings, some of them managed to do it. This is just a sample of one student's script. It's much longer than this, but I just wanted to show you what the programming part looked like. I'm not going to explain all that, but this is based on a format called XML. It's actually a similar format that Microsoft Office is now based on, okay? So we'll move past that part. I know that looked impressive, right? Now, the actual results of the exercise. The scheduled lab hours for the course, they were allowed to work as groups. Well, let me put it this way. I should say they were divided into 8 groups of 5 to 6 students each, and they were allowed to use the scheduled lab hours to meet and work on the project. Okay? Interestingly enough, the labs were always full. From the start of this project, even past its end to the next project, the labs were always full. I can't complain. Only one group didn't meet as often as they should. They seemed to have a lot of internal conflicts that I couldn't get them to resolve. But they did manage to turn something in at the end. So they made a lot of effort. All of the stories that were created were lesson or moral based. So for example, one story was about what a blind user should do in the case of a fire. Okay? Yes, if you're in a house and the fire breaks out, what should you do? And others were moral based about not fighting, not getting into conflict and things like that. So they were all quite interesting actually. They were required also to make a 10-minute presentation at the end after completing. So the presentation wasn't just what the story was about, but they had to demonstrate it. One of my more ingenious students decided to blindfold himself and demonstrate it. He actually managed to do so quite successfully. And happily, all of the group members turned up, all of the groups turned up, and the group with the internal conflicts, well, they didn't do as good a job as they should have, but they did pick up in the final assignment. After, I suspect what happens when they saw the 7 other groups doing so well and they were not so well, they sort of snapped up and realized that we were going to be left behind. So you see, a little peer pressure can do some wonders. The only issue I had with the stories was there were minor slips in the dialogue when you listen to the story. So they might make a statement, something like, they might say, suddenly an object comes across and the main character might shout, "Look out!" Well, clearly, you understand? So that's a natural reaction that you would see, but that would obviously give a blind person a difficult look out where. So, but they were minor. They're nothing. It wasn't deliberate or anything. That was just minor slips in. Where I think when they were recording it, they got so excited they forgot who they were recording for. But they were minor. There was nothing serious enough to make me grumble about or anything like that. Good. So when they actually added up the number of audio files created, there were about 224 between the 8 groups. So the smallest number for one group was about 17. The largest was 52. I will try to play 1 or 2, and hopefully will this actually play, to give you an example of that. Oops. Me and trackpads don't work, so let's see if this will work. Okay, it's not working on this computer, it's working on mine. But I want to play some samples of what it sounded like. So I would just describe them. So in one case, the first one was actually 2 students, one pretending to be the operator for 511, I think it is, for the ambulance. And he tried to change his voice. He sounded more like a duck than anything else. But he did try to do a little voice acting. I think it was a good effort. And then the other one screaming in the background. What was interesting about that sound is that I think they took, from what I understood, some paper, some wax paper, and wrinkled it up in the back to make it sound like fire burning. Okay, and then the one at the bottom, they actually got a sound of a car crashing, and then they went and got a wheelbarrow and spun the wheel to make it sound like the wheel spinning of the car after it crashed. So, sorry you can't get to work on the computer, but if you want to hear it later, feel free. Okay, so. I did an attitude survey at the end, just a brief survey to see what the students thought of the whole exercise, and the results that I thought were the most interesting was this one here. They all thought the exercise was hard. This is actually a good thing. I didn't want them to think it's easy, because if they thought it was easy, they would probably sink back into the old bad habits of treating users as just, you're just there and I can easily give you a piece of software. I want them to realize that developing software for users, whether sighted or otherwise, is a difficult task. In fact, if you look at the activity of developing software, 60% and up of the time is now spent on the user interface, okay, for various reasons. So I want them to get into the idea that just slapping software out there in any form or fashion is not a good idea. And so they all agreed this well. A couple said it was easy, but most of them agreed that it was a difficult exercise, which is a good thing. The most common complaints, et cetera, were, interesting enough, not enough programming features were allowed. I had disabled a lot of the programming features to make life easier for them, and ended up making them very upset with me, because usually they tell me they hate programming, and now they're complaining that I didn't give them enough. So I'm just going to open it all up next time I do it and just see how they react to it. As usual, the creating the stories were, as you expect, a difficult exercise, because you're used to creating stories for your own kind, cited and whatnot, and now I'm restricting you. Mixing and combining the audio files, of course, is another difficult aspect, given the limitation of we didn't have a lot of software, and that sort of software may cost money, but I think I may have found a solution to that. And of course, the programming part, as always, was a difficult exercise. I mean, programming is never an easy exercise, regardless of what some people may say. And the lesson learned, that shouldn't say create stories, should say creating anything for specialized user groups is a difficult exercise. When I look at the comments, you can summarize them all to that point. They all came to the understanding that when you're dealing with users, or even users with specialized needs or otherwise, it's a difficult exercise. And this actually was reflected in the final project. Now, so to end off here, the final project, which lasts about 2 months, or the last 2 months of the semester, they were told they had 3 areas they could focus on. They can pick education, using the web, or data management. When I say data management, I'm talking about managing files, photos, etc. And they had to pick a specific group. And I didn't care what group, as long as it wasn't the blind, because they just finished with that group. So this is just an example of some of the groups they could have picked. And they had to tackle an issue that is unique to that particular user group. So not only could they, I didn't just want them to create software and just give me something. For example, just say, well, I've created software to manage photos. My response would have been, big deal, so is everyone else. I need you to come with a specific problem with managing photos that you are trying to solve for a particular group. Okay? In terms of the actual final projects, I saw an increase in understanding and consideration of the group in question. So whereas before I found that once their main objective was to get the project finished, they actually put a lot more effort into the group that they were dealing with. And the irony of it is, even though they had more work to do to accomplish that, this set of students finished all their projects and produced better work than the last set, who were just rushing through to an end. So maybe having to think harder actually produced a better result. So there was a reduction in unsupported assumptions. Okay? So a group prior to this one was developing something for the deaf, and one of the instructions written on the screen were, in dealing with this particular thing, read aloud the instructions. Okay, you see the problem there, all right? Okay, but we didn't see that sort of those sort of errors here. Interestingly, all of these groups decided to focus on building games for children under 10. I'm not sure why all of them picked it. They refused to tell me why. So, but the good thing is they all didn't focus on the same age range. So some went from 2 to 3, 4 to etc. Okay. So the only problem with that is that they didn't, I don't think, well, they lacked the experience. They didn't realize that developmental changes from 2 to 10 are more dramatic than from maybe 16 to 21. So they actually made their boundaries where they cut off were a little bit off. But that's not really a problem. That's to gain experience. But at least they attempted it. The other thing that was interesting is that I told them, even though I put the restriction saying that any testing must be done with your own students on campus, your own fellow students, to stop them from drifting out there and making errors, etc., they totally ignored that and went ahead into the communities where they lived and tested the software in the primary schools, took pictures, video, the works to prove to me that they did it. So I wasn't too happy at the time. The end result turned out well. So they did do a good job, and teachers actually cooperated with them, and et cetera, et cetera. So those projects went nicely. These are 4 screenshots of resulting applications out of the 8. And as you can see, most of them focus on maths and English. The one on the upper left corner is pattern matching exercise. You drag the little, like for example, you drag the bear into the silhouette that actually matches it. The other one, I should also say the top 2 applications on the top row here are all web-based, while the bottom 2 are application-based. Okay, so these will have to run on the computer. These you can use a web browser. So this one here would have dealt with math, English, etc., and the other one was dealing with matching of shapes. Then the one down in the corner was dealing with spelling, and then of course we have addition. So, and actually they all worked very well. I was quite happy with that. And the teachers who actually used it were quite impressed, in spite of my warnings. So, I'm finishing faster than I expected, but in conclusion, it went well. I have to admit it went well. The applications were well developed. I didn't have the usual problems of getting students to finish the projects. They're all very enthusiastic. Even though this class was bigger than all the other classes for the same course, all of them completed. Based on comments, there are things that I need to do. So most of the comments the problems weren't with the assignment itself. Most of the comments were to do with technical in nature. So, for example, all of that stuff at the top there they want better programming tools. So I'm hoping that when they leave, they will be going out there building software and not trying to avoid it. So all of that stuff is done. The documentation, I admit, was a little bit weak, and the tutorials I gave them were a little bit weak. So I'm going through the process of typing that all up. Typing can be a very long-winded process, as you know. The software here, some of y'all would have seen during Cuttle, the Audacity software. I'm going to introduce them to that. I thought they would have, I made the error, that's my fault, of assuming they knew about it. I should have asked. I need to expand. There's a section in this course we teach about ethics, because since human-computer interaction requires a lot of human testing, in other words, someone has to sit and test the software, I need to expand on that and get them to understand there's some ethics involved there, because I did deal with it briefly in one session, but if they're going to go run it behind my back and run off to other people outside the community, university community, I need to make sure they understand that you just don't just dive into a group and start testing it. That's very important. And well, this was a preliminary exercise, so I would need obviously to formalize my whole activity on that. That is it for me. Questions?
Exactly 30 minutes. Right on time. Hi, Colin. I found it very enlightening, and I'm going straight to the ethics. I want to know if your students have to do the city training that most students have to do when they apply to the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, in order to get permission to do the research projects.
No, well, two things. The postgraduates do. Well, the ones I supervise, I don't know about the others. I should talk about the ones I supervise. They've all gone through it this semester, actually. And I am due to do it myself. Don't record that. And as far as the undergraduates, no, we didn't put them through because they're not supposed to be doing these sort of tests. So, but I think when I go through the exercise, I want to go through the exercise first so that I can talk to them properly on the subject.
Why I ask that is because in medical sciences, one of the things that we are doing to enable the research component of our undergraduate students, trying to instill it in them, is that when they start third year, one of the things they have to do in a brief research course that they're doing, they have to undertake that city training, and it's about human subjects, essentially. So the whole idea about you get a better understanding of what it is to be subjected to just things being thrown upon people and the negative consequences for everyone. So I think that may be something that you could think about, even if you put it in early, let them know in a year in advance. You have to do this. That could be probably one of the key things for the course. You have to complete it before you come in. So it certainly worked for us. Our students really understand the ethics better in terms of the research. So that's just a suggestion.
It's a good suggestion. I don't think my discipline would be too happy if I tried it. But anyway, I would take that into consideration. But it's a good suggestion. I agree. Anyone else?
Hi, Colin. Great presentation. So after you're finished with all of these projects, what happens to them? Do they go onto a shelf, or do they stay on a computer and they're lost, or are they improved on and donated, or what happens to them?
Right now, they're just in my drawer, in my filing cabinet, because, well, really, truly, they belong to the students. Once I mark them, it's the intellectual property of the students, as far as I'm concerned. So it's up to them. Some have promised to go forward and do something with it, but I think after studying so long and whatnot, and you get into the world of work, you forget all of these things. But I will try to encourage them.